And welcome everyone to God's Views on Political News. So glad that you could join us today. I know that we're going to have a live chat for those people who are here, and we're going to get started in a moment to get a lot of things on the table. I tell you today, a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things that are happening around the world, in the United States and elsewhere, so that we want to get those all covered. I want to say hello to my co-host, Bill Cloud. How are you, Bill?
How are you doing today, Susan?
Good, good. I know that you've probably been watching the news as I have, and there's a lot that we need to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to first talk about what's going on with all the wiretap, the hearings yesterday with Director Comey of the FBI and Admiral Rogers, who's also the NSA director. Have you been watching that, and did you get to listen to any of it?
I didn't. I just kind of listened to reviews and reports about it, and didn't have time to really listen to the testimony. But my view is Comey is kind of all over the place the last several months with different things. So I'm really not sure what to make of anything he has to say.
It is interesting, though. Like you said, he is all over the place. It depends on who you're talking to, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, and what the subject matter is. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, I would think that his integrity is at least questionable at this point in time. So, I wouldn't take too much away from this and put too much stock in it right now. And I just kind of have this sneaking suspicion that all these things will be said, and then Trump's going to come out of nowhere with, "Here's the proof. Here's what I've been telling. This is what I've been telling you."
Well, what is so funny, too, about yesterday was that, that a U.S. Attorney General Sessions has recused himself from anything that has to do with the Russian, quote unquote, Russian interference of the election. So he's not involved in this at all. And so James Comey said yesterday, I went to the DOJ and I got permission to talk about the fact that we have an investigation going on. Now, I find that kind of strange because, number one, talking about an investigation has got to be classified. So why would you be talking about it? If you were really intent on trying to find some real information, why would you be giving away some secrets, if you will, to the Russians or any other foreign country that you're looking at and saying, we're going out there and we're looking and we're investigating? I mean, gives them time to go back and kind of hide the trail of things, if you will, if there is anything going on. Seems to me there's a lot of deception. And he also, when he went to ask the DOJ's permission, he would have gone to an Obama appointee, the second person in command, because Sessions recused himself.
Well, it seems to me, and I'm not a politician, so I don't know how these things really work, but it seems to me the first thing we need to do is to rid the DOJ of all the Obama appointees, because they can't be trusted.
Yeah,
plain and simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing of it is, too, right now we're between a rock and a hard place. We can't get rid of Comey right now, because if you do, it looks like you're doing that because he's found something. Yeah. He's hot on the trail.
It looks like you're acting like Obama would have acted.
Yes, absolutely.
Kind of try to shut something down. So.
Yeah. So I think that we're kind of stuck with him. But it's interesting, again, there's some reports that he had some connection with the Clinton Foundation, maybe giving donations at the least. And yet nobody's talking about a conflict of interest when it comes to James Comey in doing anything in regards to the Trump campaign. And we're not talking at all about the Clinton email servers. It's kind of like that's old news. Nobody talks about it. No investigation at all. But this thing with Russia, where, again, nobody's found any connection, but we continue on to do this story and especially in mainstream media. They came out yesterday as if the case had been solved, as if everything had been proven by the fact that there were allegations made. And people spent, the Democrats in the House, they spent 15 minutes talking about allegations as if it were actual proof.
Well, it seems to me that the Democrats, or at least some of the Democrats, are grasping at anything, trying to find something that'll stick. and they're still mad over what happened in November. And I guess it would be fair to say that they're sore losers, and they're going to try to make it as difficult as they can. Where Comey's allegiances lie are, in my view, questionable. Again, his integrity, as far as I'm concerned, is at the very least questionable, considering he was back and forth and flip-flopped and so much. So it makes me wonder if one of the reasons Trump did not dismiss him earlier when he had the chance is because he knew that Comey would try to play the political edge and try to further these allegations that there's some kind of Russian collusion things.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a real mess on our hands that is not going to go away. We're going to have this for 4 years. I mean, I think that these type of allegations are going to continue to come up, and this Russian interference allegation is going to continue. And it's something that even if we find zero evidence, which I think we probably will, it's going to continue. They'll continue to talk about it. And I know, Bill, looking at this, it's the Saul Alinsky playbook all over again, because all they're doing is repeating information. Doesn't have to be factual, doesn't have to be any proof on it. It's just like if you repeat it long enough and often enough, then people will start to believe it. And this is what I see happening.
Wasn't it Hitler or Goebbels who made that very statement? If you repeat a lie often enough, the people will believe it.
That was Goebbels.
So, I mean, and that's true. That's true. And especially when you have a large part of the culture who is ignorant of how government works, what facts are. This is kind of an unrelated topic, but in my mind connected. There was a guy interviewing these college students about the Department of Education, the new secretary for the Department of Education, DeVos, and how they hated her, and yet, without talking about her, praised the policies that she's upholding. And it's just because they were ignorant of the fact of who she was and what she stood for, other than what the media has put out there for them to believe. So it's in large part ignorance, and there are those in powers in certain situations that exploit the ignorance of the populace to their benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing because what happens is, like you said, people hear something and they say, oh, okay, well, I don't like her because of X, Y, and Z. They don't go and research it for themselves. They just hear it enough where they start to believe it, and that's what they have in their heads. And then when they find out, like what you were talking about in the interviews, and they find out that they really do believe the same things that this Betsy DeVos believes, but because it's Betsy DeVos and she's a Republican, we automatically are going to assume, without doing any research, that what she's saying can't possibly be true or anything that we agree with. So I think that is really telling when we have stuff like that and people watch that. But I'm concerned, Bill, because I think there's a ton more deception going on than there used to be. I mean, is there anything in the Bible talking about deception or, that black is white, what I'm saying? The opposites are at play. What does the Bible say about that?
Well, there's several different verses, but the one that comes to mind that stands out is in Isaiah 5 when it talks about how there comes a day we'll call good evil and evil good, and they will exchange light for darkness and bitter for sweet. And there are other passages that talk about how the enemies of God conspire and they plot and they scheme. Going back to the very beginning, the adversary didn't try to seduce the woman with blatant, obvious things that were wicked, sex, drugs, rock and roll. He seduced her with something that had the appearance of being good. And he hid the evil intent. So there's conspiracy, there's deceit, there's hiding things here. And he presents it as something as being good. And throughout the scripture, the enemies of God and God's people have unfortunately been successful in getting us to fall for these kinds of things. Another instance that comes to mind is the manna that God fed Israel in the wilderness. Well, there was a group of people among Israel that it says that they gave in to intense craving. What they were craving for was the food that Egypt had to offer. Well, they were successful in getting Israel to crave these things too. My point here is this. There is this methodology that the adversary has of making something that's not good for us look good for us. And because we have a tendency to give in to our own desires and will and what we want, whether it's health care or this, that, or the other, we'll listen to those who tell us what we want to hear. But there is deception. And I realized that we were talking about Mr. Comey and the things going on in the Justice Department, or the things that have gone on in times past in the Justice Department. But it's that all same big ball of string. You know, it's all interrelated. And so there is a great deal of deception. And my prayer is, and I think we should all be praying in this vein, things that have been whispered in dark places need to be brought to light. And those things that have been plotted behind closed doors need to be shouted from the rooftops. You know, again, in my mind, this is connected. What's going on right now with the hearings, the Senate hearings, with Gorsuch? You know, are these questions that are being fired at him? They're trying to find a gotcha question. Right. And really, it seems to me that there's been this conspiracy to, how do I want to say this? Not only delay his confirmation, but delay his confirmation so that the travel ban issue comes before the Supreme Court before he gets on there. And so these people are pretty doggone clever in how they approach these things. Right. But yes, I do think there's a great deal of deception. I want to believe that God is going to bring those things to light. But I'll tell you, it's going to be dependent upon what you and I and all of God's people around the world in this country do. And we really need to be seeking God about these things. Did I answer your question?
You did answer my question. And I know for people that, if you have any comments, feel free to write your comments out there and type them in, and we'll discuss those as well. Anything in the comments that you may have and what we're talking about, or any other things that you want to bring up. But I have noticed that, Bill, and I've noticed also, there seems to be more and more where there's an agenda, and the agenda is what you're saying. Depends on, Comey. What are they trying to do? They're trying to prove there's a link between Donald Trump and Russia and the Trump administration. With Gorsuch, they're trying to prove that he's not who he says he is. He's not a good person. I see a lot of character assassination going on lately, and people not worrying about what the truth is, but worrying about what their agendas are. And it's a sad state of where we've come to in America in a lot of respects.
Yeah, sometimes it seems, just on the surface of things, it seems quite hopeless. I mean, how do you really and once and for all uproot all these things? And it reminds me of the parable of the wheat and the tares. The wheat is representative of the sons of the kingdom, Messiah says. The tares are the sons of the wicked one. And the tares are sown in the midst of the wheat on purpose. And in the parable, the reapers want to go out and rip up the tares, but he warns them, if you rip up the tares right now, you're going to risk ripping up the wheat too. And this principle applies to so many different situations in our life, and it applies here in the political realm. However, in the parable, there does come a time when the wheat begins to produce its fruit, the tares, now it's harvest time. And that's when the reapers go in. So what I'm getting at here is all these deceptive, the deceptive attributes of those who are, push wicked agendas and who work in darkness are really being shown to be what they are. In other words, the fruit is appearing. So that hints to me that we're coming into harvest time. And so I'm praying, and I'm going to be hopeful that as wickedness and evil and conspiracy is exposed, I'm going to pray that God will allow these things to be uprooted once and for all. Now, that's a tall order, and it's really going to require a lot of prayer and seeking God on our end. But maybe we've been given that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. We've absolutely got to do something because, and I think that's why it's also so important for us to continue to spread the truth, because somebody has to be the light in the darkness. And that's what we try to do with this show and other shows, that we want to inform people and encourage people to go out and do their own research and find out what the truth is, instead of believing what other people may say and just taking their word for it. Now, Bill, I know that you had a subject that you wanted to talk about, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about Tomi Lahren, who she is and what happened to her. I know that was something that you wanted to talk about.
Well, I don't know really who she is so much, other than I know that she's supposed to be this up-and-coming, quote-unquote, conservative star. And then I read that she was 24 years old, and no offense to 24-year-olds, but, I have two sons in their 20s, and they haven't quite figured things out yet, But what I was mentioning is this so-called conservative on The View, and why any conservative would go on The View is beyond me. But anyhow, and then she stated that she was pro-choice. And so I'm asking the question, and I'm not the only one, but I'm asking the question, can a conservative be pro-choice? And I don't see how you can do that. But the bigger question here is, can believers continue to identify as conservative if conservatism is taking an unbiblical stance on different situations? So when we identify, and I'm talking about us as believers, when we identify as a conservative, a Republican, a this, a that first, then we end up with egg on our face, and we end up having to defend things that biblically can't be defended. Conservative, in my view, is supposed to be somewhat akin to being biblical. That's how I see it. Now, I know that everybody else doesn't see it that way necessarily, but I do. And so the point here is, it's becoming very obvious that quote unquote conservatives, constitutionalists, as she proclaims herself to be, are taking positions that are, in my view, anti-constitutional, anti-conservative, but most importantly, anti-biblical. So we're going to, as believers, have to be very careful not to identify first and foremost as a Republican, as a conservative, as a constitutionalist. First and foremost, we need to identify as a believer and uphold those principles, and let our conservatism be manifest from that point of view.
Yeah, Bob is saying that it's impossible to be a Christian and conservative and believe in pro-choice. And, the problem is with what happened with Tomi Lahren about a year ago or so, when she started working at the Blaze, she was pro-life. And apparently, when she came to The View and was talking to a different audience, then she became pro-choice. So it's almost like what Hillary Clinton did, when she was against marriage except between a man and a woman, and then she changed her opinion. So, it's kind of like you have to know who you are. And as you said, Bill, as a believer, you've got to know who you are. You can't be Republican or Democrat. You have to be, what does that mean to be a believer? What does it mean in God's rules in the Bible for you to be a believer? What are the principles that you're supposed to live by? And being a believer, if that's who you truly are, it would be I don't know how you would say that you were pro-choice. It goes against biblical teachings. But I think that's what kind of happens sometimes when as you described, an up-and-comer. You basically change your view based upon the audience that you're talking to. And that doesn't represent well.
Well, biblically speaking, a double-minded man, or in this case woman, is unstable in all of his ways. So when you're not consistent in your, in this case, conservatism, it undermines everything else you say and do. That's a biblical principle. So, we have to be believers first. And I'll take it one step further. Even though I love my country, I'm proud to be an American. I can't identify as an American first and a believer second. Because what happens if America, as it is now doing, drifts farther and farther away from biblical principle? Am I going to continue to identify as an American over a believer? I can't do that. So and I realize that this does not promote herself as being a Christian or a believer or anything like that. She promotes herself as being a conservative. But what I'm saying is, because of the political climate today and how people have brought God into this, as far as Trump being God's man for this time, we have to be careful not to identify as an American conservative or Republican, a Trumper first and foremost. Those things should fall secondary to the fact that I'm a believer. And any of those things that I just named, any of those labels, if they contradict biblical principle, then I'm going to have to take a stand against that particular brand of conservatism, or, whatever she calls herself, whatever she considers herself to be. And a lot of it, I think she's 24.
Yeah.
She's 24, and there's the lights, and there's the popularity, and there's the acclaim, and very few 20-somethings can remain constant in all those kinds of things. So I'm just hopeful that true conservatives will continue to take a stand against this and say, no, that's not who we are.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard about it, but she did get suspended from her show for a week. And the news is kind of touting it as the fact that she got suspended because she's pro-choice. I don't necessarily know that that's true. I think in a lot of respects she was suspended because she changed her position to fit what she was talking to. She wasn't consistent, and they didn't appreciate that. And it's one thing that she's got to learn. If you're going to pick who you are and say who you are, you've got to stay consistent with that. You can't change your colors and change your, clothes, if you will, to suit what particular audience you're talking in front of today. You have to be authentic, and she wasn't. And but the news is touting it, like Fox News is saying it's because she was pro-choice. I don't think that's true.
Well, that I don't know. If it were me, I would say, what are you? Make up your mind.
Yeah.
If it's not necessarily in a news organization, I don't guess it's necessarily wrong to have a dissenting view. But if you're going to be a chameleon, that would be problematic if I were, calling the shots.
Yeah, and I happen to know, with that news organization, with The Blaze, they have people that work there that are pro-choice, and they admit they're pro-choice, and they don't have a problem with people being different and having different beliefs. But I think the problem is the authenticity of a person. That's where it went wrong, and that's what they're, if you want to say punishment, that's what she's being punished for, is the fact that she just changed who she was to suit what particular audience, and that wasn't okay with them. Let's see. Now Karen is saying, personally, I don't think the government should be involved in it at all. I'm not pro-choice. I believe in personal choice, that each individual must make her own decision based on her own beliefs and her relationship with God.
Well, I agree. I don't believe the government should be involved with any of it at all, other than the fact that I believe government is one of the main reasons we have government is to protect life and to defend the citizens of the United States. And I believe that unborn child in that mother's womb is entitled to those same protections, because I don't see it as a fetus. I don't see it as an embryo. It's a living, breathing human being. And, when conception occurs, this is how I see it. I believe this is the way the Bible presents it to us, that when conception takes place, life begins, and that child will begin to grow and develop. And even though in the beginning it might just be a blob of cells and nothing that's distinguishable, you can't tell whether it has 10 toes and 10 fingers yet, but all those things are developing. It may not have its complete form and look like a baby at the very beginning, but it has everything it needs to become the man or the woman that God created them to be. Life is there. So I do believe that the government exists to protect its citizens, to ensure life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that includes those young forming children in a mother's womb. That's where I stand on it.
Well, and if you don't, some people are, let's say they don't want to base it upon the Bible and biblical principles, take it to the Constitution then, which is, some people don't want to look at it, but that's based on biblical principles. But let's just say strictly, we're going to look at the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you're aborting babies, let's say, where's the life? Where's the protection of life? And I do believe that, it's there in the Constitution as well, that once there is life, and, we can argue, when does life begin? But life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Without life, you have none of the other protections of the Constitution, so.
Well, here's something that Americans need to come to terms with, and especially those Americans that consider themselves to be Christians or believers. I believe in American exceptionalism, but here's why. Because early Americans, people like John Winthrop, invited God to come into covenant with us. And they left us documentation that they were convinced beyond doubt that God had, in fact, entered into covenant with us. And so every founding document is based on principles that relate to a covenantal relationship with God. We can't get away from that. And when we try to distance ourselves from that, that's when trouble ensues. The Constitution, according to John Adams, and I'm going to paraphrase, he said, is written wholly for a moral, religious people. It will be of no value to any other kind of people.
Yeah, it's a very hard discussion because I'm looking at the comments, and Karen is saying to Bob, it says, but then, very good points, Bob, but then do the women who do have abortions, should they be subjected to punishment per the law, for murder?
Well, there are, as far as the law of the land, obviously there's no punishment. It's protected right now as far as as far as God's laws. I would just say that those individuals that come to regret that and have remorse over that need to carry that to God himself, because God is the only one who can forgive any wrong that has offended him. So that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree. The law does protect women who want to have abortions, and God does forgive when you repent of your sins and ask for forgiveness. So, it's a really tough subject though, because people get so emotional about the abortion issue, and they should, and in my opinion, it seems like our laws make it so that it looks like it's women's health care, and that's what, like, Planned Parenthood. They deal with women's health. Do they really, or are they in the business of killing babies? And I'm sorry, they're in the business of abortions. That's what they do. That's where most of their time and energy and money goes, is towards abortions.
I don't find anything healthy or caring about going in and slaughtering an innocent child at whatever stage of development. There's nothing healthy about that. There's nothing speaks of, it's about me. I don't want to deal with the responsibility of this situation. I realize that sometimes the woman who's carrying the child was, the victim of a violent crime. I understand that. But I think that's probably the lesser percentage compared to what's actually happening. Most of the abortions are probably because people, they got pregnant and now they don't want to have to deal with the response. There's nothing healthy about that. And And having met many women who have done this, and they've gotten older, and they have great remorse and great regret, I can tell you it's not healthy for their emotional state of mind either.
Yeah. And I know you're having a little technical difficulties today. Bill's on a Wi-Fi, so every now and then there's some technical difficulties, so bear with us. Hopefully we'll get those ironed out. Now, Bob says if a man can be charged with double murder for killing a pregnant woman, in his eyes, there's no difference, than her having an abortion. And yes, he would charge them. That's what Bob has said. I mean, you're looking at it, it is kind of an odd thing, where a pregnant woman, if she's killed, it is a double murder, which I'm glad that it is, but humans don't always get it right. Maybe that's the best thing. We don't always get it right. I do think that there's a lot more going on in terms, more than I've ever seen, where a woman could go and get an abortion even in the 9th month in a lot of places. New York wanted to do that. New York even wanted to do it where, practically down to the last second before they're born. To me, at any stage, like you said, Bill, I feel is wrong, but, and against biblical principles, but at 9 months, right before the delivery, how can that not be murder?
Well, as I see it, that's just exposing it for what it really is. Because if someone can go in there at that stage and take the life from that child, then it exposes it for what it really is. This isn't about women's health care. This is about rebellion. It's rebellion. It undermines God's purposes. God, in the very beginning, told fruitful, multiply. I mean, that's what life is supposed to do. So it is the epitome of rebellion. It is desecrating that which is made in the image and likeness of God himself. And this is something that's happened throughout history. Israel had to deal with this when their people at times would offer their children up to Molech. They would offer these child sacrifices. Well, we don't do that. They're unborn when we kill them. Well, they're still living, breathing beings. And I guess we started down this road talking about the young lady who supposedly is conservative, but now she's also pro-choice, which in my view is talking out of both sides of your mouth. Mm-hmm. But the main point I wanted to make in all this, Susan, was that as believers, our political views should be a reflection of our spiritual views and not the other. We need to conform our politics to what Scripture says and not try to twist and bend Scripture to fit what our politics say.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the abortion issue is never going to be resolved. I think that it's one of those things where there's so many different viewpoints. I look at it as it's a money-making operation, a tremendous amount of money that is being made off of baby parts and feeding that. And to me, it's almost like evil. I mean, it's so evil. I can't even tell you what it brings up in me. But so you're feeding that aspect of it, and then you're also. And we talked about this before, like the communist viewpoints and the progressive viewpoints. It's odd, and not really, but it's odd that they have these, like Planned Parenthood is always in lower income neighborhoods, especially African American neighborhoods and Hispanic. And more babies are killed in New York each year, African American babies. I mean, it's almost like they're targeting certain groups, or they know that they can go to particular areas, and it indirectly targets those groups. But it's so sad, to watch that and see sort of the elimination of human beings, especially in a particular race. It's just amazing. More people have been killed. I mean, can you imagine what it would have been like if they had been born and allowed to be human beings that could have provided assistance to this country and this world?
Well, what it reminds me of is the story in the Bible where this is the story of Moses and the Exodus. And one of the things that Pharaoh did was he attempted to destroy all the Hebrew males. And the idea behind that was if there's no males, there's no seed. So this Hebrew be propagated. The adversary, Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him, is always trying to destroy the seed. Now, I don't want to get too long-winded here, but physical seed is to remind us of spiritual seed. And the spiritual seed we're talking about is the Word of God. He wants to eliminate any possibility of what is true, what is righteous, and what is just being propagated in the earth. And so the killing of babies is not just about making money for Planned Parenthood. It's not just about establishing the rights of women and to control their own body. It's more than that. It's about the adversary continuing his attempt to destroy and negate the possibility of the Word of God being continued to be spread. And so how many of those children would have grown up to be a minister, to be someone who's going to touch someone else's life? You know, that's what's really behind all of this. And so that's why I say it is the epitome of rebellion.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And this will be a conversation that continues on forever and ever. I mean, we'll never come to a conclusion.
Not on this side of the kingdom.
Not on this side of the kingdom, that's for sure. Now, you also, Bill, you talked about conservatives touting some unbiblical beliefs. You have some things that you wanted to talk about in that area?
Well, we talked about it with the idea that you can be conservative and pro-choice. I think that's just, well, let me rephrase this. Maybe we've come to the time and place that conservatives will tout unbiblical positions like abortion. And that's why I can't afford, as a believer, to identify myself first and foremost as a conservative. If that's what conservatism, if that is what a conservative is going to become. And at the risk of ruffling some feathers, be an American is now going to be to stand for unbiblical positions that I can't afford to identify first as an American. And so I have to identify first as a believer and a follower of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then from there, you get my political positions, where I stand on these social issues. And I think I said this a while ago. I have to allow my politics to conform to my biblical standing, not take biblical principle and mold it to my political position. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing today. And it's wrong. And if we don't stand for God, there won't be a nation to stand for.
That's absolutely true. And I, you know, at one point I had these close friends, and it just happened to be that they're Catholic, and this could happen in any religion, and it does. But it goes back to your point. You can't even be a certain denomination and say, I am a Catholic, I am an evangelical, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But I remember during this whole, in California, especially during the marriage bill, you know, the gay marriage bill, I had Catholic friends who were very staunch Catholics in their beliefs, I thought, who were coming to me saying, well, why shouldn't gays be allowed to get married? Because it's not fair that they're not allowed to get married. And that blew me away. But again, that just happened to be my own personal experience. That could have been an evangelical talking to me, or any other religion. But that's when I think that if you call yourself, you know, I'm an evangelical, or I'm a Lutheran, or, you know, Episcopalian, whatever the case may be, I think it kind of negates in some way, or allows you to not look at biblical principles, because in every religion, every Christian denomination, I should say, you are supposed to still be relying on the Bible and following those principles, regardless of your own personal beliefs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, you know, my personal beliefs are one thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. But when my personal beliefs contradict what God says, I have to make a decision.
Right.
Now, who's smarter of the two?
Yes. You know, it's true.
or the creator of all things.
Right.
I'm going to go with he's smarter than I am. All right. So he has a reason for saying the things that he says. When it comes to gay marriage or same-sex marriage, the whole idea is that people who promote this want it to be equal to male and female getting married. Okay? It can't be. It never has. It never will be equal. Here's why. It has nothing to do with whether or not two of the same sex can fall in love with one another and live together. That's not what marriage is. That's not what and living with one another, but they are to be fruitful and to multiply, produce life. And two the same sex can't do that. It's impossible. And so in that way, it is never going to happen that same-sex marriage is equal to what God established in the beginning. So again, it's not about whether they love one another and whether it's unfair they can't love one another together. The idea here is biblically, they can't produce life. And if you can't produce life, then by default, what does it render? Death. Even though it has the appearance of being good to some people, whatever their politics may be, it still cannot produce life. So again, here's why we have to identify, if we are believers, then we have to identify as believers first and take that position politics are, regardless of what the culture is saying.
Yeah. And again, I think that that conversation with same-sex marriage is just like a conversation with abortion. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to kind of handle it with kid gloves type thing. And, while I understand that and I respect that, at the same time, we are called to give the truth out, to say what the biblical principles are. It doesn't mean that we judge someone for doing something that we think that goes against the Bible. That's for God to judge. But we are called to tell them the truth and to try to help them in that regard get back to biblical principles. I mean, am I correct in that? Or?
Yes, and not only that, but you and I as believers will be held responsible. We will have to give an account as to whether or not we were a light or we were not.
Yeah.
The Messiah told us, he said, look, you don't take that light and hide it. For whatever reason, you don't take the light and hide it. You put it out there for everybody to see, and that includes, and especially your enemies, especially those who disagree with you, because those are the people that you're to be a light to. So for political expediency, and because we want to be relevant and we want everybody to like us, and we want to come across as being quote unquote loving, we adopt the mantra and the mindset of the culture, then we don't really love them. We're not being a light to them. We are mixing and mingling with them. And in Revelation chapter 3, Messiah says, as it relates to mixing things, hot and cold in that particular scenario, right. He says, you're not hot, you're not cold, you're lukewarm, which means you've mixed these two together. You're not totally righteous, you're not totally wicked. And here's what he said, I will spew you from my mouth. Because apparently that makes him sick to his stomach. So I've just determined, Susan, that if at all possible, I am not going to try to intentionally offend somebody. However, if I have to make the decision between offending them or offending God, I will offend them. Because I won't have to answer to them. I'll have to answer to God.
Right.
So it is our duty to be the watchman, as you've mentioned several times before.
Yeah, and I have to say that personally, I lost a friend because she, came out to me and then basically wanted me to, I guess, give my blessings to her relationship with another woman. And, I told her my thoughts about that. And I said, I can't bless what you're doing. It would be wrong of me to tell you that. It would be a lie, for one. And I told her why in biblical principles. But so like I said, I lost a friend, and that's fine, because I have to do what God's principles are, and I have to say what they are, and I have to tell people that. But I think, with the whole thing with the gay marriage or the same-sex marriage, people look at that and they think that you're condemning gay people, and that absolutely is not true. And what I tell people is, with gay marriage, it would be the same as me saying to you, you should live with, in a heterosexual relationship. It would be okay for you to have premarital sex and live with your partner before marriage. That's also against biblical principles. That has nothing to do with about the person being heterosexual. It's against biblical principles. So it's kind of like we like to attach emotion to things and say, well, you're this, you're that, you're racist, you're homophobic, whatever. And it really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the principles say, do this, don't do this. And that's it.
Well, let me tell you this quick story. There's a man by the name of Balaam that was hired to curse Israel. And this is in the book of Numbers. And 3 times he tried to curse Israel, but he couldn't do it. He had to bless them 3 times instead. So here's the principle. You can't curse what God has blessed. Mm-hmm. Now, the opposite of that is true as well. You can't bless what God has cursed. If God says this is wrong, you can't put your blessing on it and make it okay. Not with God. You can make it okay with culture,
right? But
you can't make it okay with God. And so I'm not authorized. You're not authorized to say something that God says is forbidden. I'm not authorized to say it's okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like you mentioned, we that. But who are we more willing to offend, them or God? Who should we make sure he's happy with us, the creator of all things?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a tough and emotional discussion, but it has to be made sometimes, especially when people, again, are asking you to be in agreement with them when it's against biblical principles. And you're right, you can't do that and not be right with God. And I would rather much rather be right with God and lose a friend than the other way around. Now, in the last time few minutes that we have, I wanted to talk about what's been going on in the Middle East that we're really hearing nothing about on mainstream media. I don't know if you heard about, the other day, this was like last Thursday, Israel noticed that there was an envoy of, a weapons convoy on the way to Lebanon from Syria. And, they decided to fire upon that convoy, of course, because the weapons would have been going to Hezbollah, which would have been eventually just used against Israel. I mean, they're not going there. Let's face it, they're not going there for any other purpose than to be used against Israel. And so they blew it up. They did some anti-aircraft strikes and they blew that up. Now, what happened was this time, which is unusual, is that the people turned around and came after the Israeli aircraft, and they actually fired on Israel in retaliation. And that's something that has just never been done. People wouldn't have the audacity, to do that because they know the defense systems in Israel and how great they are. But Israel came out and told Syria that if you do that again, we're going to destroy your defense systems, and we're not going to hesitate to do it. And so did you hear about that? And what are your thoughts on that type of thing taking place right now? It seems to be heating up more in the Middle East.
Well, there's ongoing developments in the Middle East, because Israel and what goes on in Israel is kind of the epicenter of the Bible as far as prophecy goes, and as it relates to things that are quote unquote end times. And I just happen to be one of those that believes we're living in the end times. So personally, I believe that what goes on in Damascus, what goes on in Syria, and to some degree, the so-called West Bank,
right?
That area that's under the Palestinian Authority, I believe that these two regions and the conflicts and the politics of it all are all interrelated. And the Bible tells us in Isaiah 17 that there comes a day when Damascus is destroyed. It's a pile of rubble. That has not happened yet. Mm-hmm. I used to think that Israel, the IDF, would probably be the one. I'm come to the place that I think it's possible that the ongoing civil war and the Russians trying to get involved in all these things, I think it's very possible that Syrians or those who are among of a rebellious faction in Syria, they may bring the destruction upon Damascus themselves. Now, if you calculate into that Israel has now issued a warning, if you let that happen again, we're going to take out your defense systems. All right. So what happens if Israel were to take out Syria's defense systems? Then all these rebellious factions would have a leg up. Yeah. I don't think the Syrian civil war is over. I don't think at least today, I don't think it's over. There's, Assad has the upper hand, no doubt. But what if Israel? And I think it will spill over into the so-called Palestinian territories. And that's where, as far as the Middle East, people need to be keeping their eyes and ears open. I realize that things are going on in Iran, ancient Persia, and we need to keep our eyes on that as well. But Syria and the Palestinian authorities is where we need to keep an ear out for the things that are developing there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because kind of right after that, Syrian-led rebels went in and did a surprise attack. They were led by two Islamist groups. They did a surprise attack in Damascus on Assad's regime in Damascus, and the state-led media said that Syria was forced to repel those jihadists that had come in and attacking. And they said that there were even tunnels that these people had made, the Islamists that were coming in attacking that had made. So, there's a hotbed of activity going on right there in Damascus. And I'm just, I know what you're saying, that in the beginning you were thinking that maybe it was Israel that was going to destroy Damascus. And I think it could still be possible, because if things are happening in Damascus and heat up, and we know, well, we're told, and I believe this by a number of people, that that's where the weapons of mass destruction are from Iraq, that they all came, and they're right there in Damascus, underneath the ground in Damascus. I mean, what would it take to set off something that would be almost like a nuclear blast going off that would, in fact, destroy Damascus?
Well, it could be something like that, but the pictures I've seen coming out of Damascus, large portions of the city are already destroyed. Yeah. Already laying in rubble. So, we can only speculate, but if Israel were to do what they said, neutralize Syria's defense systems, and that would give opportunity for these rebellious factions to mount attacks. And if it was a concerted effort, who knows what they might be able to do. I just think it's possible that the destruction comes from within, not necessarily, Israel going in and doing it. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting too that now that Hezbollah is saying that they downed an Israeli drone the other day after all of this is going on, and Israel is saying, no, the drone just fell. So, I mean, it's almost, again, as if Hezbollah is not listening to Israel and what Israel is saying, and they're continuing to do things that sort of taunt Israel. And I think that's an interesting development, and I think, again, we're hearing nothing about it. And I have a little news program that I do in the mornings, and somebody had said, well, we need to be worried more about what's happening in Chicago with the gangs and people dying in Chicago than we need to be worrying about the Middle East. Do you really think that, Bill, yourself, or do you think there's a balance that we should be worrying about what's happening in the U.S. and what's also happening in the Middle East? Because doesn't that impact us?
Well, I feel that if you watch what goes on in Israel, it will be reflected by what goes on in the United States. I believe that there are two exceptional nations in the world, Israel and the United States, with all due respect to our friends and other nations.
Right.
And so the things that happen in Israel or in that region have a direct impact on us, not only politically, but there's a spiritual connection there too. So should there be a balance? Yes, but it shouldn't be out of balance that we're so concerned about what's going on here that we ignore what's going on over there.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yeah. And I think as Christians, we should be aware of what's going on and what impact it could have on Israel. I think that's something that should never leave our focus as well. And I do think, I tell people in my opinion, there are terrorist cells located in the United States, just waiting for the signal. And guests that I've had on my shows have said the same thing, that that a lot of them, were let in under the refugee programs, and they believe that they have come in from the countries to do us harm whenever the time is right. So, I think what heats up in the Middle East, makes it imperative for us to see that the same thing could be happening here, that we may be some trouble coming. And in fact, as just the other day, they issued that from 12 different countries now, you're not going to be allowed to use electronic devices when you're flying from those countries to the United States.
Well, then there's something behind that decision.
Yes.
Well,
exactly.
let me suffice it to say that if you watch Israel, and when you see that they've had trouble on their southern border, you'll find that we've had trouble on our southern border. And so now if Israel has trouble on its northern border, wait and see if there's not problems on our northern.
And that's pretty interesting that it would parallel with us like that.
Well, we'll just put it to the test and see if there isn't some kind of correlation there. And I'm convinced there is. Yeah.
And I do think, just like you, that there's something going on, that we're at a heightened alert that people from these countries aren't allowed to use these electronic devices. And apparently these don't affect any of the United States airlines themselves, because these are all nonstop flights that they're concerned about. And the United States doesn't take nonstop flights to these countries. There's always a stopover someplace. So, again, we never seem to get too much information of what's going on in the Middle East. We don't hear about it. He doesn't talk about it. The president's not going to talk about it, probably because he doesn't want people to know what we're doing. So we do need to keep our eyes on him, like you. There is a parallel to that, and we will look out for that.
Well, I've been studying this a long time. So, look, I realize we're running out of time, and I just wanted to say I apologize for the technical issues on my end. Not sure what it's all about, but by next week, I'll get it worked out.
Every time, something's got to work with us. Wi-Fi is doesn't work so well, but there's an echo going on mine. So hopefully we will get it all worked out next week. And
everybody that's watching, just pray for us that we get these technical issues worked out, because Susan is working with one arm tied behind her back. That's me. I am a technical. I don't know technical stuff. So,
and I'm looking at one last comment here from Monique. She says the spiritual connection is so critical to understand all that is going on and how things are interconnected. But at the same time, that spiritual awareness is not easy for many to achieve in these days and times, especially when Christianity is under attack and when its teachings aren't being eliminated. Our teachings are being eliminated from our society. Very true. Very.
Well, and that's why you and I and others need to speak up.
Yes, absolutely. If we don't, no one will, and the Christianity will be even more under attack than it has been. So Again, thank you everybody for coming today. Sorry that we're having such technical issues. Hopefully by next week everything will be worked out. Please, if you will, go ahead and share this. And again, thank you so much for being here, and God bless you. Bill, anything you want to say?
No, except God bless.
All right, guys. Have a good week, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, Karen. See everybody next week.